Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. Just a couple of hours ago, the National Conference of Bar Examiners released a bombshell announcement offering the possibility of what they called a Plan B shortened online version of the bar exam to be given on October 5th and 6th of 2020. My co-host, Megan Saya, joined me online for a Facebook Live session with our students to talk about these new changes and new announcements. And in the midst of our discussion, Texas made some announcements and New York made some announcements. So we covered all of that. And we thought it was important to get that information out to all of you, our listening and watching audience. So we are going to put together this special edition of our podcast, and I invite you to listen or watch. If you'd like to watch, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/307, or you can just listen on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, and so on. I'm not going to keep you waiting. I want to jump into the information that we have, the most recent information, and of course we'll be updating it in the days to come. Well, it's 5:01 in the east, 2:01 in the west, and oh my God, the world is blowing up. Because there has been a tsunami of crazy stuff in the last, hour? And so we are trying very hard to get all of that pulled together. We're going to try and tell you what we know right now. We're going to offer some insight, but remember, this is first cut punditry, and it is subject to a lot of change, no doubt, because we are just literally trying to rock and roll our way through this as we go along. Well, should we go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Why don't you update everybody on what we've just learned from the National Conference of Bar Examiners in just the last few minutes.
All right. So the NCBE, kind of out of nowhere, set out a release that they have decided to give what they're calling Plan B, but I would think of as Plan C for the bar exam. Plan A being the regular July exam, Plan B being the two September-October dates that they had. Now we have this third option, potentially, which is the NCBE has said that they are going to provide a shortened version of the UBE for an October 5th and 6th administration, and it will be online. So they have a lot of caveats that come along with this, though.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all those. So let's break it down. Yeah, we see the questions are coming already. So let's start with this. First of all, we do not know of any jurisdiction that has at this hour announced that they're going to do this test. This is simply an offering from the national conference, and no state, to our knowledge, has said, yep, we're going to do it. So start with that, okay? Now, let's get into the caveats. First of all, what is this two-day test going to be?
Yeah, so what they've said is that it's going to be for a remote administration after all of the other three administrations have happened. So this is not going to be something that you probably will not have. If you're taking an earlier administration, you will not have your test scores back, presumably, perhaps if you've done the July exam. And this is an optional exam for state by state. They're going to have to decide whether or not they want to give it. So this is not a mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. We could end up with quite a few states giving it. We could end up with not a lot at all. So let's see, I want to make sure I get this right. The exact, how they're cutting it down, they've said there'll be fewer questions than they will have all the component parts, but fewer questions.
All right, so let's talk about component parts. That means there will be a multi-state, multiple choice type of exam. There will be multi-state essay exam questions, fewer. There will be performance tests, again, fewer, we think. So this is primarily going to impact UBE states, okay? That's the early implication of this. A state that is giving their own state essays or performance tests, like California, would theoretically be much less impacted, if at all, because they would just then, I guess, use the cut down version of the multi-state bar exam if they were going to do it. So the starting point with this is that if you're a UBE student, listen up very carefully. If you're not a UBE student, it still has implications because Florida, California, Texas, Georgia, and we're going to talk about Texas in a minute because they've just announced in the last hour some changes as well. It's got implications for you potentially, okay? So we're talking about three components, all of which then, Megan, are cut down is what the NCBE says. So,
and the NCBE has also said that states have the option to sort of pick and choose within them, it looks like. So the state they're basically giving you, the state, a platter of here are extra test questions. And then it's up to the states, do you want to use all of them? Do you want to use some of them? Do you want to use none of them? So that's kind of what their posture seems to be, is a sort of, here we will give them to you to use for an online administration, and then we're walking away and do with them what you will.
Yeah, I mean, my initial response to this is that the national conference is having a little bit of a temper tantrum, that they're saying, well, we think this is a bad idea. We'll give you some of the quotations from the NCBE president. We think it's a bad idea. We don't think it's a good way to test, but if you want, if you must, here it is. And in fact, they're calling it Plan B, which is a little ironic since we've been talking about Plan B for a while. But so that's the first part of it. Now, there's some really big caveats here with respect to where these tests, how they're scored and graded, and then where they go from there, right?
Right. So I guess first, I think probably the most important piece is that they have said explicitly that these are not UBE tests. So they will not be transferable the way a normal UBE administration is. That's really, really, really important. So if you are hoping to become barred in New York State, let's say, and New York State does not offer this, but Colorado does, you cannot take Colorado's October 5th and 6th online exam and try to transfer it in to another UBE jurisdiction. Obviously, individual states are always allowed to extend reciprocity to one another, but this is not going to be covered the same way that a UBE jurisdiction is, where there's automatic reciprocity between the UBE jurisdictions. That's really, really, really important.
Yeah, this is critical to understand. You cannot move scores around. This is a one-off, and if it's a jurisdiction that you want to practice in, if it happens to be your home jurisdiction, great. But I really want to emphasize what Megan said about New York in particular, because we know New York is one of those states where they're going to close out or they have closed basically their administration in September to anyone except these first-time takers from New York Law School. So there are a lot of people wanting to take the New York exam. So let's say, and this is hypothetical because New York, again, to repeat, no state has said they're going to do the October 5th and 6th exam. But if New York said they were going to do it, great, and you want to take the New York exam, take it. But if New York said no, but Colorado or New Mexico said yes, you can't go to Colorado or New Mexico, take the exam, and transfer the score back to New York. So it's got to be in the state that you're taking it. So that's one massive, massive caveat to all of this. The other is a little more subtle, but equally important in terms of grading, right?
Yes, so it's going to be very interesting. The NCBE has basically washed their hands of anyone who wants to give this administration, so it's odd that they're offering it at all, because what they've said is it will be up to each state to grade and determine the passage for this administration. So even though this is written by the UBE or by the NCBE, rather than by the state, the NCBE will not be equating scores on the MBE. They will not be giving these generalized, here's passing, here's not. So that means we can expect to see a significant amount of variation in what is considered a passing score and what is not from state to state for any states that give this one.
Right. Again, to clarify, each state is grading their own exam. So unlike the UBE, which is essentially governed by the national conference, and the multi-state, which is equated across the entire country. Now each state will have to decide based on this test how to grade it. And Megan, you were making the point before we went live. That means if you've only got a handful of bar takers in your state taking this cut down version of the multi-state, what's a passing score?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, how does anybody know? And what kind of discussion will there be in advance of that? Maybe it would be a lower score than you would have needed otherwise, maybe a higher score. And one of the things the National Conference said in their statement, and I thought this was interesting, those of you who've been following us for a while on this know I've been talking about equating scores, which means having enough bar takers to know that the test is reliable. And the examiners said that they continue, this is their quote, NCBE continues to strongly advocate that a full-length standard in-person administration of the bar exam /UBE is best for a number of reasons, including psychometric issues, which means the equating. So there is no equating of this exam. It's every jurisdiction on their own, which makes it kind of like the Wild West. This is kind of, before I even started in bar review, this is the way the bar exam was given prior to the MultiState in 1971. And so every state's doing something potentially different with the grading, which means that who knows? I mean, it's an absolute crapshoot as to what happens. Now, you and I were talking offline about should somebody take this exam? You want to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I think we just kind of decided that as of right now, the biggest concern for whether or not, as I know that's the big question for everyone, is should I sign up for it? The biggest consideration is going to be, is the state that I want to practice in giving it? Because if it's not that state, don't waste your time with it. Okay. So don't pick a state that you're like, well, maybe like just if it's the state that you live in, that you plan on practicing in, that you're moving to, whatever your situation is, then that's the most important factor. And then second, we just don't know. It could help you in one state and it could hurt you in another state. And so it really it's not a huge expenditure in terms of your effort. Like it's going to be a shorter exam than the normal UBE, but still over 2 days. So presumably much shorter time frames on those 2 days. And you're going to be able to do it from your home. So to some extent, it's like, it might be worth it to try, but you are going to have to know that at least as of the information that we have right now, unless the state comes out and is more clear with here's what our passing score will be, here's how we will come up with that score. As of right now, where we don't know that, it really could go either way. So you are taking a gamble, but it could pay off. It might not.
And the gamble, maybe it's no gamble because maybe you couldn't get into an exam otherwise, right? It seems unlikely to me that they'd let anybody that sat in July resit in October, but I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's possible.
And it'll be up to each state. So
I mean, and we don't know, obviously, if a state said, hey, we're going to give the exam on October 5th and 6th, when would you offer that information? When would you have applications? How would you enroll people for that exam? Those are all unknowns. And we say all this because it will be easy to get distracted. I mean, we're giving this information to you today. I know there's a sense of urgency to this, but it's because we don't want rumors out there and we don't want people distracted by what isn't the case. What we know at this moment, again, to repeat, I feel like a news anchor. What we know at this hour is that no state has acknowledged an October 5th and 6th exam. It could be that the National Conference has simply done this as I don't want to say publicity, but for public relations purposes to say that they did the best they could. To go back to Judy Gunderson's statement, she says, we think that, she says, it's worth noting that many other high-stakes professional licensing exams, medical, healthcare, et cetera, are still being held in person or postponed until they can be held in person. The NCBE does not want to do this test. I mean, I think don't you read it that way? It's just like,
yeah,
don't want to do it, don't make us do it, but okay, we're going to do something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's worth noting too that they still haven't given California an answer for the California September exam, which California is hoping to do online with the cooperation of the NCBE to provide them with the MBE online. And the NCBE still has not given California an answer about that. And that's an early September exam, and yet has now provided this online half measure for October. So I'm kind of wondering if this is their way of saying to California, well, you wanted an online option, we gave you one, you don't have to take it or leave it. You would leave it because California does a state exam, not the UBE. They test California specific subjects like community property that wouldn't be on a UBE exam. But that being said, everything is so up in the air that maybe this is better than nothing, and California add supplemental questions. I don't know. At this point, it's odd. This was an odd statement. This was a surprising thing
Odd
to
timing.
hear from the NCBE.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
End of the day announcement, right? On a Tuesday seems like a very weird, what? Huh? What are you guys doing? And there's another part of the NCBE statement that I want to underscore here because I think it goes to this whole point. They say without further research, scores from an abbreviated version of the MBE, which is what they're offering, administered by remote testing, which is what they're saying they would do, get this, cannot be considered comparable to the standard paper-based full-length MBE administration, such comparability being an essential requirement for equating and scaling. I think they're saying very clearly, this test doesn't mean anything, right? We're going to give it to you, doesn't mean anything, you shouldn't use it. You can score it in your own jurisdiction if you want. You can't transfer it. It's not a UBE test, and knock yourselves out. The other interesting part of this that you and I were talking about before we went on is the technology behind it. Not only is the NCBE saying we're not sure how we're going to do this, they've just thrown it over to the states, haven't they?
Yeah, so, and this is again, the NCBE really just kind of, they like threw a bit of a bomb and walked away, I think. It said, you clean it up, you figure out what you want to do with it. But yeah, so they said it'll be up to the states to figure out, here's testing, there are testing companies, actually they even gave names, they just said there are testing companies. And it was interesting, they said that give online bar exams. Well, I mean, this is a new territory, so I'm not sure what they meant by that, but certainly California, it's going to be interesting. Now I think everyone should be watching California's first year law students exam, which is slated for this month, at the end of this month. It will be an online exam, and I think that before we were saying California students should be watching it and any students who are taking in an online jurisdiction. Now I would say everyone should be keeping their ear to the ground about this. We'll keep talking about it in our Friday webinars and on the podcast, that the rules and how they're planning on administering that exam might apply to a lot more people, and there's certainly going to be a lot of eyes watching around the country to see how well this online administration goes, and if it is a success or a failure, could help determine whether states are willing to give this October one a shot. Yeah, I think it just suddenly put a lot more pressure on the California examiners who are giving this June test to kind of see that this really is this small group of first year test takers are really going to be the national guinea pig for, is this a possibility even? Yeah,
I think so. And you and I talked in last week's Q&A and then the podcast about the difficulties of the online testing. And to that point, the NCBE said our only role is to make the test materials available and to establish testing dates and start times. That's it. And then you're on your own. After that stage, you figure it out. And that lends itself to an awful lot of variance, and that will be pretty crazy. I think each state will have to make their own decisions. I know Massachusetts is one of the states that said they're going to go online. They were going to leave the UBE for this administration. Would they come back and do the shortened UBE in October? Maybe. I mean, it certainly seems like one of the states that might be open to do that. New York certainly isn't going to be able to accommodate everyone that wants to take their test in September. And would they go online and do this? I don't know. It also means incredible amount of work for the bar examiners in those states, because now they have to do the grading. I mean, they get the test, but they have to do the grading, and they don't get the benefit of the NCBE doing all the drafter point sheets and the equating and everything else. There got to be some bar examiners with giant-sized headaches this afternoon or this evening. I mean, this just cannot be good. I guess we should pivot a little bit to Texas, because right on the heels, I mean, not 10 minutes after the national conference made their announcement, the Texas bar examiners made kind of a shocking announcement. You want to talk about that a little bit? Or?
Yeah, so they decided to condense their exam as well. So Texas is going to be doing a shortened version. It's going to be 2 days now. They usually have 2.5 days of an exam, and they're going to be doing the 2 sessions, July 28th and 29th, and then September 9th through 10th.
Yeah.
So they will reduce the number of essay questions in half, from 12 down to 6. So pretty significant change there. And they said they're going to change the weighting of it, obviously with such fewer essay questions. So now it's going to be The MPT, 10%, Texas Procedure and Evidence, 10%, the multi-state bar exam, 50%, and essays, 30%.
Yeah, so the essay writing becomes much less important in Texas. 6 essays. I think what they'll do is they'll just take one from each topic grouping. Remember, there's 6 topic groupings with 2 questions in them typically. So they'll just take one, as my guess, from each of those, and they will do those questions, but they only count for 30%. The other part of this is that they are now adding the September 9th and 10th test date, which means, and we don't know at this point, I don't know, is that me or you?
Oh, it's me. I'm sorry.
That's right.
My computer is trying to.
That's right. So the other part of this is I don't know if they're going to assign people to a test date or if you'll have an option for a test date. That is not clear to me from the short information I just saw. So we'll try and keep you up to date on that. And by Friday, we should hopefully know a little bit more. But again, one of the interesting things about the Texas statement was that they also talked about the psychometric reliability of the test. And they are also talking about this idea that fewer essays reduces the test reliability factor. But if you increase the weight of the MBE and you reduce the weight of the essays, then you get it back to an acceptable factor, acceptable level. So we're all becoming experts in things that we never thought we needed to know about.
Yeah, and I do just want to say with this Texas thing, so this is Texas's last administration before they move to the UBE, and I got to say, when I see that they're increasing the weight of the MBE and decreasing the weight of the essays, if you are planning on taking the Texas exam and you are someone who struggles with the MBE, I have to feel like you might want to take a UBE exam this time around instead and then try and transfer it into Texas once Texas has made the switch, because I got to say, like 50% weight for the MBE means you better crush that MBE score. Otherwise, there's just no way you're gonna pass the rest of the exam. So, it's at least something to keep in mind.
And I'll just point out for all of you that are in our course, you can switch jurisdictions, you can switch dates, you can defer, there's no charge. It's easy to do. I can't speak to those of you who may be listening later and taking bar exam courses with other people, but for us, that's our policy. I think this will cause havoc in the traditional bar review world. It's going to be tough for everybody. I think we're, generally speaking, better suited to deal with it just because our students are all working and online and ready to go. I think that the basic advice I would offer, and I get your thoughts as well, Megan, is everyone should continue doing what they are doing. You should study as you're studying. You should assume the exam is what you knew it to be. When and if a state says we're not going to give a test in September and we are going to jump to this October date, then we will respond to that as we begin to understand how they're going to grade it or what they're going to do with it. But remember, it'll still have the same components: essays, performance tests, and multiple choice questions. And the NCBE has said all of those things will follow the format of the testable subjects. There'll just be fewer questions, shorter questions, whatever it might be. Not shorter questions, just fewer questions. Yeah. So I think that you can be reasonably comfortable that the preparation you're doing is going to pay off one way or the other, either through the traditional exams in July or September 9th or September 30th, or even if you're doing this online October exam, whatever that may be, or you're into 2021. I mean, whatever it's going to take, it still appears to me that it takes the same form that we've seen, just in condensed versions. So anything else? Any thoughts you've got about that?
Yeah, I just want to say I just checked, because I always check because things change so quickly. New York has just said that they are opening their second application period from today through June 12th, with applications being accepted from any candidate who graduated with a JD from an ABA accredited law school outside of New York and who has not previously sat for a U.S. bar exam in any jurisdiction. So that is, if that's not you, then you're not in the second wave either. So yeah, and that won't be closed till June 12th. So I think you're pretty much, if you were hoping and waiting, if you've taken and failed the bar exam previously and hoping to get into New York, it looks like that's not going to happen.
And if you're a foreign trained attorney, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's a group that should be looking at this possibility of the October 5th and 6th if it happens, or finding another UBE jurisdiction now. I think it's pretty clear that, generally speaking, repeat bar takers are being given the short end of the stick almost everywhere. I hate to get into a victim kind of mentality about this, but I think it's pretty clear that the priority virtually everywhere has been first-time takers, which is ironic because most of the first-time takers are not going to take the exam. They're going to sit out. I mean, they're going to use diploma privilege where they can, I think. So it continues to be this bizarre, strange situation. But for New York bar takers, yeah, I think if you've ever taken a bar exam somewhere else, you're not going to sit in New York, certainly not in September. And maybe New York will decide that this October 5th and 6th makes sense for them if they want to offer the test. But then if they know it's primarily a group of repeat bar takers, do they grade it differently?
Right, exactly. I think that's something to note, that in a state that has given priority to first-time bar takers, you've got to assume that if they then allow the online version, they will assume that that will be mostly repeat takers, and they may grade it harder with that in mind. So,
yeah.
But we will keep everyone updated as things happen on the webinar and the podcast, and let people know, because it may be that some states take this and then they explain, here's how we're planning on doing the grading. So we will definitely be on top of that and letting people know as we hear from states. Hopefully they'll give some guidance about how they're planning on doing it, so that then you can make an informed decision about whether or not it's worth it for you, or if you should just wait until February to take it.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
I think this is what you said. Just keep moving forward. I think people should really keep studying the way they've been studying. All subjects are still fair game. Do not stop studying any subject because you think, oh, it's a shorter one, so they're probably not going to do X. No, every subject is fair game still. And just keep focused on the fall in general, in that later summer, July into the fall. And if you can get into an administration, fantastic, you'll be ready. If you can't get in, you'll be even more ready when you get to February. So before we sign off, we got a question here about a comment about why would the examiners grade repeat bar takers harder? The answer is that it's a built-in prejudice that repeat bar takers don't pass the exam. They have a presumption of not being prepared and ready for the test. And so you're just going in with a presumption against you, basically. Also, if you take out the high scorers and you've got mostly low scorers, I think the examiners would go in with something that looks more like a quota of, how many people do we want to get out of this particular administration of the exam. Now, that's all speculation. There's no way of knowing that right now at all. There may not be any way of knowing it ever, but I think it's something to keep in mind. So a lot of things changing, a lot's happening. We will be doing our Friday Q&A webinar for those of you in the course. If you are watching this later somewhere else or listening to a podcast, we will update this in those formats as well, and we'll keep you updated as to what's going on. And we will let people know. If you're a student in our course and you have questions things we've touched on here, feel free to post them on the Facebook group or email us. We will cover them on Friday. Hopefully we will know a little bit more. I don't really know that we will, but maybe the shape of this will start to play out a little bit more. I would in general advise all of you to avoid speculating if you can, simply because go that way. One other question I do want to address, because it just came up, is if you take the UBE, will it not be transferred? Yes, of course it'll be transferred. If you take the UBE in July, September 9th or September 30th, that's a UBE and it will be transferred. The only dates we're talking about here are October 5th and 6th. That test is not transferable, but that test hasn't been offered anywhere yet. So don't get ahead of yourselves on that. So just to be clear for everybody. All right. Well, thank you very much, Megan. Appreciate it. It's good as always to see you. And we will look forward to seeing what happens here in all the jurisdictions. We didn't mention Florida, but we don't know what Florida is going to do with this. So there you go. So I think Florida, California, New York, who knows? Anyway, thank you. And thanks all of you for being with us. And we will catch up with you on Friday for sure. And if anything breaks new, we will come back to Facebook Live. Okay? All right. Thanks, Megan. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.